I think that a lot of us can agree that Five Nights at Freddy's Into the Pit blew our expectations away. Being the first FNAF game developed by Mega Cat Studios, there was a lot of interest around how the game would turn out, especially since the game is based around a Fazbear Fright story. However, once it was released, it was immediately praised as being a phenomenal game, with some even claiming it to be the best game in the entire franchise. And after playing the game for myself, I can absolutely see the hype around the game. So much so that before I even finished my first playthrough, I was already thinking how I could recreate it in Minecraft. Not only did the 2D style of the game feel like a challenge, but the main mechanic of having a constant threat chasing after the player is something I personally love in any game, and I really wanted to see how I could make it work in Minecraft. So now heading over to Minecraft and getting right into it, I've already gone ahead and outlined the pizzeria itself and marked down where different props and decorations are going to be set. Something that you might notice right away about this layout is the fact that it looks very different compared to the in-game map, and that's because that map isn't very accurate to how each room is actually spaced out. For example, the map shows that the ball pit room is supposed to be directly above the backstage, but for that to be the case, the door would have to be right up against the stage itself, since the map shows that the door is basically right up against the stage curtain. That and the wall between the kitchen and the ball pit room is far too small to fit the posters and chairs which are physically present, which once again makes the map inaccurate. And finally, the last thing I want to point out is that even though we only see 3 of the 4 walls in each room, I've still decided to include the background props that appear closest to the screen, as well as some decorations on the wall that we don't see. Now this is nothing that's going to change the build too much, but at least it won't make it look bland on one side of the build. So with that being said and everything now out of the way, let's get into a time lapse and get started working on the build itself. And now with the pizzeria fully built, let's go ahead and take a proper look around the place. Before I do though, there's something I want to quickly mention, and that's the fact I've already added in some command block work to the build by making every door in the pizzeria functional. If I get within a certain distance of the door, it's going to open up, and if I walk away from it, it's then going to close. Now, I'm not going to go into full detail with how they work, as I have 3 entire streams that span around 20 hours of me just adding in over 100 of these working doors to my Security Breach Ruin map. These use the exact same commands, so if you want to know how these work in full detail, I can't recommend those streams enough. And I can walk through the other side. There we go. All done. 1 door down, 120 to go. With that being said though, the build itself wasn't that complicated to put together, but it did still take a surprising amount of time to complete, with the time-lapse footage being nearly 5 hours long. Now this was probably because I spent extra time adding in some smaller details like map art on the wall, as well as some custom player heads on top of some armor stands just to make the build stand out a little bit more. Now because Into the Pit is a 2-dimensional game, the Minecraft build has to be a lot longer compared to a normal FNAF styled pizzeria that I've built before. Another change is the fact that there aren't any props in the middle of each room and they're only up against each wall, and that's another factor of a 2D game to actually let the player move around. However, I still don't even think it looks that bad from a 3D perspective, as all of the decorations still fill up the build and make it interesting to look at. With that being said though, I decided to keep every room exactly 9 blocks wide, that way if we were to look at it from a 2D perspective, it wouldn't make one room look bigger than the other. The only exception to this is the safe room, which is the only room that faces another direction, since the door that opens up to it is up against the arcade wall. Now while I'm here, you're also going to notice another detail that I've added to the build, and those are the armor stand models of the endoskeletons. There's a few of these placed around the backstage room as well, but another model I want to take a look at is the Golden Freddy suit that's sitting in the storage room. Now this thing is made up of 12 individual armor stands, but it looks a lot more accurate compared to if I were to just use a single armor stand, and I think it all turned out really well. In fact, the suit itself is actually quite big, as when you see me standing right next to it, even while Golden Freddy is slumped over, the model is still taller than the player is. Then the last few armor stands are over in the security office, where you can see I've also gone ahead and added in the 5 mini arenas that hang on top of each monitor. Now there are a lot of Easter eggs like this in Into the Pit, so I really wanted to make sure I added as many of them as possible into this world. But now just because I finished building the pizzeria itself, it doesn't mean I'm done with the build just yet, as I always like to add in some hints of gameplay into my projects. Now I don't plan on recreating the entire game, as that would take too long and too much time away from my other projects that I'm already working on, but there are a few things that I have in mind that I think will make exploring the build a lot more interesting. So the first thing I want to add is Spring Bonnie himself, who is of course the main threat of the game. Now just like Golden Freddy and the Endos, the model I've made uses different armor stands for different limbs, that way I'm able to recreate the character as best as possible in a Minecraft form. However, instead of having it just stand still, what I've gone ahead and done is placed each armor stand over an invisible zombie, that way when the zombie moves around, it looks like Spring Bonnie is moving instead. Now this also does a lot of the work for me by making Spring Bonnie work just like in-game, as once I get within their line of sight, they're going to start chasing me just like a normal zombie would. However, to make it a bit more threatening than just a normal zombie, I've also gone ahead and applied some effects to it to make it a bit faster, and then also increased its follow distance, that way if I try to run away from it, the zombie's going to be able to follow me into another room. Before looking at how to hide or escape though, I first need to set up some proper animations for Spring Bonnie, as right now they're just sliding along the floor. So to start, I'm first going to add a proper walking cycle, and then I'm also going to add in the jump scare itself for whenever I end up getting too close to them. And here are all of the commands that make it work, starting with the walking animation. Now since Spring Bonnie is made up of multiple different armor stands, I've set up multiple rows for the legs, both arms, the head and the ears, just so I don't get confused with what's what. So the way armor stand animation works is by changing the rotation values of each limb of a single armor stand. You can see that for the armor stand tagged SB Body 1 that both the left and right legs have different rotation values attached to them. Now to make it look like it's actually moving, the next command block changes those values slightly, that way the armor stand moves to the next frame in the animation. I've compared this to stop motion animation in the past, and essentially that's all this really is. That's how the actual animation itself works, but now to get it to play on its own, I've set up a scoreboard timer which is going to power a certain frame when the timer hits a certain number. So the first frame starts when the score is set to 32, then the second frame powers when it's set to 30, and each command block goes down in increments of 2, all the way until it reaches 0, and then the timer is going to reset and the cycle is just going to keep on continuing. However, since I only want the animation to play when Spring Bonnie is actually moving, at the start of every single command block is an execute command, which is only going to power the command block if the zombie is moving. So if the zombie walks, the animation is going to play, and when it stops, the animation is going to stop with it. So to show this off, I'm once again going to set my game mode to survival, and now you can see that instead of just sliding, Spring Bonnie is actually walking towards me. Now something else I've also done is given Spring Bonnie the ability to open up doors on his own, that way even if I try to run to another room, Spring Bonnie is going to be able to keep chasing after me. So now taking a look at the jump scare, this works in a very similar way when it comes to the animation side of things. However, for the system to actually power, this repeating command block here is looking to see if the Spring Bonnie zombie is standing within 1.75 blocks away from the player. That's then going to send an output and power this first chain of command blocks here, which needs to set up a few extra things before the jump scare itself plays out. The first thing that happens is a redstone block is going to be placed next to this repeating command block here, which is going to teleport me directly in front of Spring Bonnie and force me to face towards them. Then the zombie's AI is going to get removed, that way it doesn't walk around anymore, and then this scoreboard called jump scared is going to be set to 1. Now what this scoreboard does is stops all the other animations from playing like normal, that way while the jump scare is happening, other animations won't be able to play at the same time. From there, the rest of the command blocks are all for moving around the different armor stands for the jump scare animation itself. Now once it ends, the redstone block is then going to get removed, and then I'm going to be teleported inside this black room before I then get taken to the game over screen itself. Now just like Into the Pit, the game over screen has Spring Bonnie's head emerging from a ball pit, which is also going to have the game over text on screen while I'm here. So now to show off everything all together, if I end up getting caught by Spring Bonnie, the jump scare is going to play out, and I then get taken to the game over room. Now after a few seconds pass, I'm going to be teleported back inside the pizzeria, where Spring Bonnie has also become active again. That now wraps up all of the animation side of things, meaning I can now move on to more of the game mechanics and be able to hide in or under different hiding spots. However, since I've already built each one by using full blocks, I'm going to have to use a few different building techniques to let me interact with a certain object and then be able to hide under it. So my idea to make this work starts with a scoreboard that's going to detect for whenever I'm crouching. Now this is what's going to serve as the input to let me hide underneath the table. Before that though, I need to actually know if I'm able to hide under it or not, so this command block here is going to put a title on screen telling me to crouch to hide if I'm standing within 0.5 blocks of these coordinates. Then if I walk away from that block, the title is then going to get removed. However, if I'm standing at those coordinates and I crouch at the same time, I'm then going to be teleported to a block underneath the table. Now to stop me from suffocating in the table block, the middle block is going to be set to a top quartz slab, that way I can actually stand under the table and see what's going on outside. Finally, this last command block here is going to set the score is hiding to 1, which is going to be important for the later part of the system. So as you can see, when I walk up in front of the table, I get the prompt to hide under it, and if I crouch, I then get teleported under the table and I'm no longer in Spring Bonnie's reach. Now you'll also notice that a new prompt has appeared on screen which tells me to move forward to get back up, and this is what the second set of command blocks do. So once I know Spring Bonnie is no longer nearby, I can walk forward to the end of the block, which is then going to teleport me back up to where I was before. This also works for the other two sides of the table, so instead of having to be in the middle block of the table, I can be at either the left or right side of it, and the exact same commands from before are going to power, which is then going to let me go into hiding. So now that I can hide under the table, I've now set up a way for Spring Bonnie to leave, so that way I'm actually able to run away. Now this uses a Minecraft mechanic I haven't really used before, however it works surprisingly well for what I'm going for. So if I'm underneath the table and Spring Bonnie is within 3 blocks away from me, this command block is going to send an output and spawns a villager on the other side of the room. Then what's going to happen is an arrow with the tag walk away is going to spawn directly above the zombie. Now the reason for this is so that way the villager gets the zombie's attention a lot quicker by having another command block tell the zombie that the villager was the one that used the arrow on the zombie. This is then going to aggro the zombie instantly, which is then going to chase the villager across the room. So even though this is a scripted event, it's a lot better than having to wait for the zombie to manually walk away from the hiding spot so that way we can get out of its follow distance. To see this working, if Spring Bonnie is chasing me and sees me hide underneath the table, they're then going to walk directly on top of the block that they last saw me on. Now since it's within 3 blocks away from me, the villager has now spawned in and the zombie took damage from the arrow, so it's now going to run away from me and go after the villager instead. However, if I leave the hiding spot before it reaches the villager is then going to be killed, which puts me back as the main target for the zombie to start chasing again. So I have to wait for a certain amount of time before it's safe for me to get back up. Now for me to actually know whether it's safe or not to come out of hiding, I've set up some play sound commands to play which are going to sound like a heartbeat. Now this is going to keep on playing while Spring Bonnie is within a certain distance away from me, but is going to stop playing once he's far enough away to the point where he can no longer see me. Now the table is only one example of a place that I can hide in, as there are also chests and vents all around the pizzeria that I can also hide inside. So what I'm going to do now is add in the rest of them, and then I'm going to come back and show off how some of the different ones work. So with everything else now added, I'm now going to show off the vent system first, as it has an extra mechanic to it that makes it a lot more useful than the rest. So just like every other hiding spot, I walk up to it and then crouch to go inside. However, you can see that the prompt is telling me that I can also use the vent by walking backwards instead of just being able to get back out. So if I go backwards, I'm then going to be teleported to another vent in the building that it's connected to. Now from there, I'm either able to go back to where I just was, or I can leave the vent and now I'm in a completely different room. Now while I'm here, I might as well also show off the Golden Freddy suit, as this also works a bit differently and might actually be my favorite of them all. Now just like everything else, I crouch to use it, but then I get teleported on top of the suit and I also have a pumpkin put on my head to make it look like I'm actually wearing it. Now I'm still able to look around and move around a little bit, but then to leave, I just need to walk forward and then everything else goes back to normal. This setup uses the most amount of command blocks than any other hiding place, as it still uses the normal teleport commands, but I also need to clear the armor stands for Golden Freddy's head, that way when I'm using the suit, those items are not going to be in my way. Then when I leave the suit, those items need to be put back on individually, which doubles the amount of total command blocks. And once again, just like every other hiding place, if Spring Bonnie sees me go inside of it, it's then going to spawn a villager outside the room to lure him away. Speaking of luring Spring Bonnie away, I've now also added in all of the noisemakers around the build, as these work in almost the exact same way. When I walk up to a certain item, I'm then given the prompt to interact with it, and then crouching is going to cause it to make a lot of noise. On top of just having a sound play though, a wandering trader with the tag noisemaker is going to spawn inside the room where I cause a distraction. Now to make sure that only one noisemaker can be used at a time, the chain starts by killing any other noisemakers, and then setting the score noisemaker to 1. This is then also going to increase Spring Bonnie's follow range so that way he can see the wandering trader from across the pizzeria. Finally, an arrow is then once again going to be dropped on top of the zombie, that way it aggroes it, and it's then going to start heading towards the room with the wandering trader. Now once it gets within 3.5 blocks away from the entity, the noisemaker is then going to be killed, and then the noise itself is going to stop playing. So right now Spring Bonnie is over in the ball pit room, and if I turn on this radio, you can see that he's going to start heading over to this area. Now even while I'm in survival, it's going to prioritize going after the wandering trader instead of me. However, if I'm still in the room when the music stops playing, Spring Bonnie is going to start chasing after me again. Now I won't bother showing off the rest of the noisemakers as they all work in the exact same way. However, I want to go ahead and take a look at the fuse box next, since it's a brand new mechanic that also just so happens to make a noise when it's used. Now this part of the system here uses the exact same commands as everything else, but to actually give the fuse box a purpose, I need the lights in the building to go out occasionally. So these two command blocks here act as a scoreboard countdown, which is equal to about 5 real life seconds. So every 5 seconds, this timer is going to reset, which is when this next command block here is going to power. Instead of having the power go out on a set timer, however, this block uses the random command to roll a number between 1 and 100 and stores the result of it in the scoreboard called fuse random. Now if it lands on the number 100, this command block is going to send an output and gives me a blindness effect, which is then going to stop me from being able to see as well as being able to run. So every 5 seconds there's a 1 in 100 chance that the power is going to go out, and I need to use the fuse box to turn the lights back on. So once the power goes out and I use the fuse box, the blindness effect is then going to get removed, but then a wandering trader is going to spawn inside the room and call Spring Bonnie to the area. So I can either run away and go somewhere else, or I can either hide inside a nearby chest or vent and wait for Spring Bonnie to leave. With that being said though, there's still one last noisemaker left to add before they've all been fully completed, and that just so happens to be the second animatronic, and that is of course Chica. Now Chica doesn't just act like a normal noisemaker, as just like Spring Bonnie, she's able to roam around the pizzeria and go to different rooms. Now this can be a good thing if trying to lure Spring Bonnie to the same place, but it can also be an issue if she's accidentally wandered into. However, unlike Spring Bonnie, Chica doesn't actually jump scare the player and is instead solely just a noisemaker. So instead of putting all of the armor stands over another zombie, I've put them over a wandering trader instead, that way it can still walk around freely but without chasing after me. However, since this would normally mean that the zombie would chase the wandering trader, I've put both mobs on the same team so that way they don't interact with each other. Now the animations for Chica work in the exact same way as they do for Spring Bonnie, so I'm going to skip over all of this and show off what happens if we end up getting too close to her. Now as I mentioned, Chica is a walking noisemaker, so if I get within 5 blocks away from her, it's then going to cause her to start an alarm. To start, this scoreboard is then going to be set to 1, and then all other noisemakers are going to be removed from the map. Then the noisemaker scoreboard is going to be set to 1, which then also means that another wandering trader is going to spawn on top of Chica, which is then going to call over Spring Bonnie. Now while all of this is happening, the wandering trader is constantly going to be rotated to face me and won't be able to move while I'm still within the radius. Once I leave though, all of this is then going to be reversed, however Spring Bonnie is still going to be active and run to the room that all of this happened in. So as you can see, if I get too close to Chica, she's going to face me and start to wave her arms around and play loud music at the same time. Now even if I try to get away from Chica, Spring Bonnie is still eventually going to find his way into the room and start chasing after me instead. So that now nearly wraps up everything to do with the main animatronics. Now before this, I was actually tempted of just having Freddy, Bonnie and Chica up on the stage and have them dance to music, but now I'm glad that I didn't do that, as I think this makes the gameplay a whole lot more interesting. With that being said though, I still want to add in one more of those animatronics, as I think it will make hiding from Spring Bonnie even more challenging. And that animatronic is Bonnie, who doesn't actually walk around like Chica or Spring Bonnie do, and instead just hides underneath the tables. So what I've done is placed an armor stand underneath each one, and every so often this player head is going to be put on top of one of them to make it look like Bonnie's peeking out from under it. So in a similar way to how the fuse box works, there's a timer that's connected to a randomizer that's going to determine if Bonnie is going to be hiding underneath a table. So every 20 seconds, this command block is going to roll a number between 1 and 20, and if it lands on 20, the second part of the system is going to power. Now what this is going to do is start a second randomizer to roll a number between 1 and 5, and this is what actually decides what table Bonnie is going to be hiding under. Now at the same time, all of the other armor stands are going to have their head items removed of any items, that way only one of them can be visible at a time. Then finally, one of these command blocks is going to put the player head on top of the armor stand, depending which number gets selected. So now let's go ahead and take a look at Bonnie himself, as if I use a hiding place while Bonnie is there, it's then going to trigger the jump scare. However, instead of having a separate model for every table, this single model is going to be teleported under the same table whenever it's needed. Now all 5 of these systems work in the exact same way, so I'll show off table 1 for this first example. So if I'm at these coordinates underneath the table and the scoreboard Bonnie table matches 1, the Bonnie model is then going to be teleported underneath the table right behind me. Then the peeking Bonnie head is going to get removed, that way it's not in my way, and finally I'm going to be teleported to face Bonnie whenever the jump scare itself plays out. So right now we can see that Bonnie is currently hiding underneath this table here, and if I go under it at the same time, I'm then going to be jump scared by Bonnie. Now this is then going to lead to the exact same game over screen as before, and then when I'm taken back to the pizzeria, Bonnie's timer is going to reset with it. Now I do want to mention that in game, instead of the jump scare happening instantly, we are able to escape from Bonnie if we manage to get away from him in time. However, since it's a lot easier to see Bonnie in this world, I think it's fair to have it be a lot less forgiving. And with that, the core 3 animatronics have now been added, and the main gameplay has also been fully completed. However, there is still one last thing that I want to make, which is what the entire game revolves around, which is of course the ball pit itself. Now since I want to make this functional, it also means that I need to add in Jeff's Pizza along with it. So I've gone ahead and done just that by making a copy of Freddy Fazbear's, but changed it up to be the Jeff's Pizza version of the build instead. And just like with Freddy's, I've also gone ahead and already made all of the doors in the building functional, as well as finally adding in some proper sound effects, so that way walking around the place feels a lot more immersive. Now the layout of the building is the exact same as before, however the changes in the interior honestly make it look like a completely different building. And even though it's supposed to be a run-down version of the original pizzeria, if I have to be honest, I really prefer the look of this build compared to the other one. Now I might as well go around this building as well before I get to the ball pit itself, as there are a lot of differences between the two, but then there's also some parts of Freddy's that I've also carried over to Jeff's, such as the paper pals and other posters along the wall. Now it was actually quite fun to make all of these changes, as it reminded me a bit of building the ruined pizzaplex. Instead of there being bright and colourful decorations, most of the props here are leftover supplies and storage racks, but I also think that the darker tone of colours and lighting really help make this place look run down. Even in the ball pit room, you can see that I've added in a flickering light to the room, which just adds even more atmosphere to make the build feel more real. However, now focusing on the ball pit itself, let's go ahead and see how I can get this to work just like in-game. Now instead of just being teleported from one building to the other, I wanted to make the transition a lot more interesting, where just by looking at this can probably give you the idea of what I'm doing. Now there are two different setups here which do the exact same thing, but one takes me from Jeff's to Freddy's and the other takes me from Freddy's to Jeff's. So to start, this command block here is looking to see that I'm standing within the set coordinates in the middle of the ball pit. Now the second half of the command block is only going to let it send an output if it can't detect for an entity tagged ball pit. Now what this entity is an invisible armor stand that's going to spawn in the middle of the ball pit that I just traveled to, and is then going to be killed off once I get a certain distance away from it. Now this is what's going to stop me from constantly teleporting back and forth between the two ball pits, as since I get teleported inside of the ball pit and not out of it, I want to make sure that I've actually left the pit first before being able to use it again. So once all of that happens, a redstone block is then going to power this repeating command block here, which is then going to teleport me inside of this box made of concrete powder. Now what's going to happen is I'm going to be standing in the middle of it facing forward, and then the ceiling is going to disappear to let some concrete powder fall around me, that way it makes it look like I'm diving into the pit. So to show this off, when I get inside the ball pit, the transition is going to play, and then I'm teleported to the ball pit in the other build, where now I can wander around this version of the pizzeria. Now if I want to go back, I just jump back into the pit again, where the system has reset itself and now I'm back at Jeff's Pizza again. So even though it wasn't that big or complicated of a mechanic, that small detail really makes the map come together a whole lot more and finishes it up very nicely. All of the features I've added have been a lot of fun to figure out and put together, so let's go over everything one last time before wrapping up this video. So to start, we of course have Jeff's Pizza that I just went over and the ball pit that's going to take me to the Freddy's version of the pizzeria. All of the doors around the building work, where if I walk up to them they're going to stay open, and then when I walk away they're going to close back up. Then of course is the first thing I worked on, which is Spring Bonnie, who now also has some proper sound effects applied to him. So this is going to make it easier to know where he's at, as now just like in game, there's some slight breathing noises to indicate that he's nearby. Now if I get within his line of sight, he's then going to start chasing after me, which is then going to lead to the jump scare and the game over screen if I end up getting caught by him. So to avoid this, I can either try running away from Bonnie, or I can use one of the hiding spots around the building. Now from here I'm completely safe from them, and if they see me go into hiding, they're then going to wander away after a short time has passed. However, if Spring Bonnie is inside a room that I want to go to, I can lure him away from it by using a noisemaker like this machine here. Now this is then going to cause a noise to play, and Spring Bonnie is going to start heading over to this area, which gives me time to sneak by him and go to the other room. With that being said though, I also need to worry about not getting in the way of Chica, as she's also going to make a loud noise and get Spring Bonnie's attention if she sees me. However, I'm able to use this to my advantage by calling Spring Bonnie over to a certain room, that way I'm able to go around them and get to the place where I need to go. Now sometimes Bonnie is also going to be hiding underneath one of these tables at random, and is going to jump scare me if I use it at the same time. There's also vents around the building that I'm able to hide inside, or I can use this fast travel around the building and go to a connected room. And just because I think it's a really cool feature, I'm going to use the Golden Freddy suit again, which also works as its own hiding place. And finally is the fuse box, which is occasionally going to burn out and cause the lights to go out. So if this happens, I'll have to make my way over to the backstage area where the fuse box is at, where then I'm able to turn it on to turn the lights back on, so that way I'm able to see again. So overall, even if these mechanics feel like a mess without there being a main objective to follow, just running around the place and trying not to get caught has been just as fun as making these mechanics work, and I really do hope that you enjoyed it as well. If you did, then make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel with notifications turned on, that way you don't miss out on what I work on next and can also help the channel to continue to grow. But with that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I will of course see you in my next video.